Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good day. It's good to be together here in the Zendo and also with all of you. Thank you for gathering. I wanted to share with you a book that I've been dipping into lately, The Shamanic Bones of Zen by Zenju, Earthlyn, Manuel. And I was fortunate to get to spend a little bit of time with her at Upaya before the pandemic. And she has a wonderful presence about her. And surprisingly to me, she speaks with a little bit of a Southern accent. I think she grew up in Alabama. And we were actually in a poetry workshop, and she's a fabulous poet. And this book, therefore, is beautifully written. I'm going to be dipping into many little parts to string together something that I hope is coherent from her beautiful book. And so I won't be reading page numbers, so you can't really follow along. But let's head out. So in some ways, I thought this book would be about the ancestral spirit and mystical heart of a sacred tradition, like it would reveal secrets that haven't been yet revealed to me. And that isn't the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is really offering her own personal experience of Zen study. She's an ordained priest and author and teacher, but it's more to offer a slightly different lens to experience practice than maybe we've encountered before, or to affirm a knowing that, you know, you or I might have had it in moments of practice, and she really affirms and kind of opens that up. So here we go. So this is Zenju writing. I enter the Zendo without a sound. I sit in my designated chair. The cold of winter causes me to wrap my light wool robe tighter around my body. The bells are ringing and drums are playing. I bow when the head teacher passes. She writes, I was drawn to Soto Zen Buddhist practice because of the ancient rituals, ceremonies, and silence. It felt familiar. The incense burning, the bowing, the quiet, the chanting, the black, the firelit candles, a feeling of floating in darkness. I found a Zen of the earth, deep in the muck of human conditions, including racism, sexism, and homophobia. And yet she doesn't let that dissuade her, which is so beautiful and inspiring. A little bit later, she says, many have asked the reason I was drawn to Zen. When I reflect on the question here, I look back and see myself dressed in clothes meant to enhance the sitting practice, robes and loose Japanese-style pants and tops. I sensed relief from the world without the clothes of the world. My shaved head felt natural. I felt a part of the many African women I have seen who keep their heads shaved. Walking without shoes had been my favorite thing to do since childhood, so walking in the temple without shoes felt natural. As a child, I was an early sitter. I liked to sit or swing in the backyard, doing what my mother called daydreaming. She was constantly calling me back to earth. The Zen poetry of joy and sorrow was like my own poetry that I had been writing since the age of 8, trying to sort out life as a Black girl child. In essence, Zen practice immediately felt like me. It was not Zen practice as it was and is being talked about by Zen teachers or written about in books. It was not the dogma, the promises of ordination, or the rules of Zen community that drew me in. Despite the practitioners of Western Zen Buddhism being overwhelmingly white and predominantly male at the time of my entrance into the gateway, I experienced an unexplainable peace and transformation with the rituals and ceremonies. When I first entered the Zendo at Tassajara Zen Center in the Los Padres Forest, I said to myself, I've been here before. It wasn't the center as much as it was the feeling of being next to the mountains and spending time under the stars at night. Coming to chant and bow, I knew this life, this living close to the earth. I felt myself on the way back as I walked the old dirt roads in the forest. I felt quite separate at times from the others for some obvious reasons, but also for reasons not so obvious. The separation served me. I was constantly having a shamanic experience of the land, the rituals, and the ceremonies coming up through my bones. Zazen, sitting in silence, was the portal. I experienced meditation, often talked about as a sitting practice, as a seeing practice. What was taught as Zen forms was experienced as connecting with the unseen world through the body. And then she writes some about how Western Zen Buddhism, the tradition that we're practicing in, came through human beings. And she argues that it was shaped somewhat by their values. And so she quotes from Sam Van Schaik, his scholarly book, Buddhist Magic, Divination, Healing, and Enchantment Through the Ages. Sam Van Schaik writes, despite the importance of magical practices in Buddhism, they are still one of the least studied aspects of the religion. I suspect that one of the main reasons for this is the idealized image of Buddhism as a rational religion, essentially free from superstition and ritual. The exclusion of magical practices and powers from most discussions of Buddhism in the modern era can be seen as appropriation of Buddhism by Europeans and Americans, and also as a result of modernization movements in Asia and within Asian Buddhism. She writes, there was a strategy employed by scholars to shield the Zen tradition from charges leveled against Buddhism as a whole in the late 19th and early 20th century, that it was a superstitious religion mired in, as she writes, mumbo jumbo, and that it was antithetical to a scientific worldview and the advance of modern civilization. And so she's inviting us to go beyond that, those decisions that were made to think of Western Zen as a very logical practice. Not that that isn't also true, but she's inviting in some things that she feels like were lost in the translation. So she goes on, in indigenous spiritual practices, including the Buddhist ones that have remained close to the earth, some of which she writes about in other parts of the book. She travels widely at one point. The rituals and ceremonies are meant to draw the ancestors close, to support the prayers, and to guide those who are suffering toward wellness. Unlike many ceremonies of other Buddhist schools, in Zen, the task of turning toward wellness or transformation is not a stated intention or necessarily a goal of rituals or ceremonies. With the lack of such explicit intentions, the significance of Zen forms, rituals, and ceremonies might feel lost and can make them seem routine, habitual, and hollow. I have witnessed the boredom and even the suffering some Zen students go through in making offerings and participating in ceremonies. Many do not have the patience with the slow and invisible effects of these activities on one's life. To see the impact of shamanic or awakening experiences through ritual and ceremony on our personal and collective lives can take decades. So we know this practice, it's not a microwave, right? It's slow. Then she asks, are we ready to expand our walk on the Buddha way? Is it time to loosen the dogma and embrace the forms as the bones of Zen from its Eastern origin? And so what interested me was that I remember when I first came to Zen, resistance, and sometimes when I meet with students, resistance to various aspects of the form, bowing, incense, why all this old-fashioned weird stuff? And she really makes a beautiful argument, I think, for how, in her words, our bones know these sort of ancient, archaic ways of doing things and being. And so she's really focusing on that aspect. And so she, in the book, speaks about chanting and ceremonies and other things, but I'm going to focus on Zazen since that's what we did this morning. And that is the most central part of our practice. So she writes, Zazen is the core of Zen practice. Za means sitting, and Zen means meditation. The word Zen has come to have many meanings in various contexts, but in the context of this book, it is the practice of seated meditation without being guided. There is no goal in mind or effort to improve one's personality, sadly. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi said, quote, Zazen practice is the direct experience of our true nature. Dainin Katagiri Roshi said, quote, Zazen is the right gate for entering the Buddha Dharma, but the Buddha Dharma is actually human life. In the view of these renowned Zen teachers, the conventional thinking in regard to Zen and Zazen is far beyond what anyone can imagine. Zazen is different from secular meditation, which generally means using meditation as a calming technique or method to remain present in the moment. As with Zazen, secular meditation often uses the breath as a focal point, but there generally is no transformation of how one perceives the world or their life. Usually there is an intention to leave religious teachings out of secular meditation. There is no seeking God, as in some religious traditions, or discovering the nature of life, as in Zen meditation. Zazen is not meant to calm one's nerves, although that may be a result of the awareness Zazen can bring over time. It is more than a religious activity, as it might appear. It is more than a practice, even though we call it that. Zazen is a prolonged ritual of seeing and listening. I'm going to read that again. Zazen is a prolonged ritual of seeing and listening. It is a shamanic process and a way of life. Eventually in Zazen, you become the meditation as it arises in you with each breath. It is no longer something you do or something on the to-do list. Since Zazen can potentially transform you at the core of your life, it is meant for the rare individual who is willing to enter meditation as ritual, deepening the understanding of life and death. Zazen is more aligned with the ancient meditations of indigenous medicine people, of where those in training leave to sit still upon the earth in silence over an extended period of time. They take many trips to the mountains, so to speak. Similarly, Zazen is a slow walk in the wilderness, step by step, bell after bell, chant after chant, breath after breath, over many years, and without effort, one may reach a vast field of illumination. And then skipping ahead a little bit, she writes, Zazen is central to experiencing the awakened consciousness that existed prior to us taking a seat in the wild. Like Buddha, we sit on the earth and allow the seeds of awakening to sprout in our lives. A seeing practice, such as Zazen, is the only method to gather such seeds and plant them in every activity of our lives. Zazen begins and continues with sitting, but over time, we come to find it is not confined to sitting. Everything in Zen practice is done through the state of consciousness brought by Zazen. In rituals and ceremonies, there is Zazen. This is an altered consciousness in the sense that anything that takes your mind and heart from the chaos of the world and centers it on the breath and the earth is an altered consciousness, a transformed heart and mind. And then finally, a closing bit before we come into small groups and consider a question. She quotes from an essay by Isa Gucciardi, a teacher and practitioner of shamanism. And the essay is called The Journey, Buddhism and Shamanism at the Crossroads. And Isa writes, meditation and the shamanic journey are processes that take place in the altered state. The altered state helps seekers connect with their inner peace in a broader way. We spend most of our time in the vigilant, problem-solving state of consciousness, of the conscious mind. In Buddhism, the goal of working with the altered state is similar to the goal of working with the altered state in shamanism, to move beyond the confines of the conscious mind and thereby receive information or insight that cannot be accessed in working with the conscious mind alone. And then Zenju writes, towards conclusion of our talk anyway, our conscious mind has limitations. When we make efforts to transform our suffering, we become aware of these limitations. For this reason, we might find ourselves entering a path of meditation to deal with pain and suffering, including physical and spiritual illness. A practitioner of Zen, like the shaman, is devoted to attending to illnesses, and in turn, the healing affects the collective family, community, and so forth. Both shamanism and Buddhism work at the root of illness by shifting awareness inward to access other states of consciousness. Accessing these states without effort is where Buddhism and shamanic traditions meet. Zazen shares certain elements of shamanism: self-realization, enhanced dreams, heightened intuition, deep concentration, a strengthened relationship with the wisdom of nature, speaking to ancestors in ceremony, living a life of spiritual inquiry into the unseen. In Zen and shamanism, you put aside conceptualization and intellectual understanding to return to a vast state of consciousness, the open field of your life. Thank you, Zenju, Earthlyn, Manuel, for this spacious perspective on our practice, which is so familiar. And so in a moment, we'll come into small groups, and I invite you to consider spending a moment to connect with and recall or be curious about your experiences of Zen Buddhist practice as embodied, connecting with ancestors, ceremonial, and or related to the natural world. And I think the goal of this conversation isn't so much to elevate unusual or special experiences. I don't feel like I've had many of those, and I'm okay with that. It's more to connect with, I was thinking about when Anne invited us to walk outdoors in the garden this morning, that how wonderful it is that life is attending, it's happening around us, cars are going by, and there's, for some reason, a whole bunch of woodpeckers. There were like 3 woodpeckers pecking away, and it's sunny and windy, and I felt like we could smell some weed coming from someone's house, and yet we're in this upright posture with our hands, by our bellies, walking. That's the shamanic part, is this ability to bring a state of embodied being, in this case, into the world, but it needn't be. There's just kind of a different way of being that I think of when I've gone to other kinds of spiritual centers, Christian in particular. There isn't that. There isn't silence, inwardness, kind of a non-conscious way of being, non-logical, physical. That really isn't, I haven't noticed that being valuable. And so I think Zenju is really shining a light on the aspects of our practice that are ancient, and in that shamanic, as she says, and she defines that as connected to nature and also healing. And I was thinking of our Bodhisattva vow, which I never had thought about as dedicated to healing. Of course, that is exactly what it is. And then, of course, the presence of incense and flowers and water. And in our case, this enormous stone from Switzerland on the altar is a way of bringing nature indoors that, again, isn't typical of our regular life. So we're just shining a little light on our practice, and perhaps it will open up something for you. And it's also okay if you're like, I don't identify with that. So I appreciate Zenju's viewpoint and her call to really ground our practice in the actual ground, especially in the face of climate crisis. And for myself, I'm really dwelling in a place of mystery and not knowing, with death in my family being so present. And so I really admired how she called us to a place outside of logic. Not that logic in and of itself is a bad thing, it's just shining a light on a different part. So let's go ahead and break into small groups, and it's 10:30, so let's be in those 2-person groups for about 12 minutes, and take a moment to just sit in silence, and then each of you can share for 3 or 4 minutes, and then you'll have a couple of minutes to dialogue back and forth. remembering that everything is optional and also confidential. And we'll come back together as a whole and maybe share whatever we've learned or gleaned from this. Thank you. So I'm curious to hear from folks, sort of what, if anything, moved in you, what memories you had or insights or things you'd like to share from your small group conversations and from the reading of the Shamanic Bones of Zen. Anne.
It made me think of when you were reading and the whole title, The Shamanic Bones of Zen, and her bringing in the association with a landscape, a physical place, a physical environment, about Taoism, and how that was the first thing I remember about thinking about Zen and meditation was being in elementary school and reading about Taoism and Zen, and Taoism particularly, that there are spirits and there are, maybe not spirits, it's not quite the right word, there is a spirit, there is something about particular places that is to be reverenced, is to be recognized and appreciated. So I really love that, this take on our practice.
Yeah, the connection to the natural world and its unknowability, at least from a human perspective, or at least from my perspective. Gabriella.
Wow, so much to say. The first thing that comes up for me is diversity, like the importance to listen to all the voices, and all the cultures, all the wisdom. I'm really grateful that you shared with us this precious wisdom from this precious woman. And yeah, it's like coming back to the origins of, as you were saying, coming back to connection with ourselves, with our body, and with the world we are part of, the Mother Nature, and all our family in the nature, and it's just beautiful. It just brings a new vision, and at the same time, it's not new, but this connection with our body and how this is like our dance. Yeah, like many groups get together and dance and sing, and that's their ceremony and their outer state, and they're coming together and singing. And I'm thinking this is our dance, our silence and our posture is our dance together. Yeah, so much to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Joel? Speaking of nature.
Yes, I got to be in a breakout room with Glenn Coleman, who is very connected with nature, and he asked if I chose this background picture for shamanic purposes, and I said, no, it's just a flower I like. But I know that people have foolishly experimented with datura in the past, and it's a terrible poisonous plant. You should not. And yes, it will cause hallucinations on your way to intense pain and suffering. You don't want that. So I'm not. I've just read that. I don't have any personal experience, but I just want to say that all that stuff. But you used a word, Robin, unknowability, and to me, this is what is most important in a seeing practice that I've read, and it's really made a big impression on me, that if you try and figure out what life is, it's happening at a molecular level, not even a cellular level, a molecular level within cells. And that it is unknowable, and yet it is so grand, so immense, so powerful that one can only be in awe. And I only have I said to Glenn, we were trying to talk about how we experienced connections to mystery, and that my one I would say that my only really important experiences with mysterious connection have been when I've been able to stop looking with hungriness, where I'm shaping what I'm looking at because I want to get to the next thing. Sometimes it happens that I'm able to not do that, and that is the most powerful experience of awe and unknowability at the same time. And I don't think that that's what exactly it's not everything that Earthlyn Manuel is talking about, but to me, it's a lot of it anyway. And anyway, thank you so much for reading this and for bringing this forward.
Anyone in the Zendo want to add? Okay. Nelda.
Good morning. I'll keep it brief, but something just came to mind that I hadn't thought of in a while. I went to visit Machu Picchu in Peru once, and I've had similar experiences, but not one that was this resonant. And we were there for a week on a number of hikes and had a guide. And there was a point at which we were walking, and there were different groups walking past us in the same direction. And at some point, I just stopped because the energetic flow from that particular spot was so intense, it made me catch my breath. And so I grabbed the guide and I said, is there anything different about this place? What is this place? And he said, how did you know? I said, I didn't, I just felt it. And it turns out that he said, turn to the right. And there was this huge stone. He said, here's where they would sacrifice people to Mother Earth. And that made such an impression on me, because this is not about me. The story's not about me. It's about how everything around us speaks to us energetically if we will only if we'll only listen. And it's hard for us to listen because we're like those old TV sets with the rabbit ears. And sometimes we don't have our rabbit ears quite straight. But if we'll work at adjusting them and fine tuning them, it speaks to us. And so I'm thankful. Thank you so much for sharing this book and this talk with us. And I'm going to not reach for it, but just straighten my rabbit ears a little more.
Rosemary.
Hi, thank you so much, Robin. Just for me, starting this practice, Anne used the word reverence for nature, and just realizing that it's the earth holding me, not I'm standing on the floor. It's just really not taking for granted the sky, the sun, the moon. It's just huge for me. That's just a big change in my practice, is that connection. and appreciation rather than taking it all for granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Marla.
Just really quickly, I've been an urban dweller for decades and don't have an opportunity on a daily basis or even a weekly or monthly basis to actually have my feet on the ground. Much pavement, buildings. So I even live now in Minnesota, where it's designed with the skyways between the buildings so that you never have to go outside in the winter, and that magnifies this effect. So what I'm now inspired to do, and I've always been really crazy about my houseplants. I just want to embrace them because they're life. And I'm going to find a way to bring into my living space more of the outdoors, not too many plants, but rocks, like the rock that's on the altar there at Apamata. And this is really inspirational to me. I can alter my environment to honor the earth without actually having to have my feet on the ground. There's nothing really that I'm going to be able to do much about that. But this has inspired me to make it more intellectual and rational while it's irrational, if that makes any sense. That's all.
And maybe our last person will be Serenity.
Morning. Thank you so much for this. For me, my life has turned into this living outdoors more than I am inside, because I'm doing van life. And, right now I'm sitting outside next to my van in the desert, appreciating the beauty and the birds going by. And yes, there are other people that are, nearby, but it is a way for me to connect with my inner landscape on a regular basis. And I even sit for meditation outside when I can, weather permitting. And it's just a beautiful way of experiencing sort of the cyclical rhythms of the world and not be caught up in my logical part of my brain that wants everything linear. And, logical to me is a lot of cause and effect. And this is a more global vision of something circular, where you're a part of the cycle. And it's not necessarily a cause and effect kind of thing, kind of relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Serenity. And thank you also for sharing that beautiful blue Arizona sky. Thank you, everyone, for your presence and for what you offered. And thank you for letting me share with you a little bit of the shamanic bones of Zen.